The first light of dawn crept across the steel-gray surface of the Seto Inland Sea, turning the water into a trembling mirror of gold. On that cold November morning, November 5, 1944, to be precise, the wind carried more than the scent of brine and diesel. It carried a sound the fishermen knew well but had never heard with such unease, the distant rumble of engines, dozens of them, echoing through the chilled air like approaching thunder. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another American task force was pushing westward, its carriers launching wave after wave of aircraft that blotted out the sun in formation. And inside a dimly lit office on the grounds of the Imperial Naval Staff College in Tokyo, an elderly admiral, once a celebrated architect of naval strategy, leaned over his journal. His hand trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of recognition. For months he had watched the tide shift, not on maps of island chains or battle formations, but in columns of numbers, shipping tonnage, fuel reserves, manufacturing reports. Battles were lost long before soldiers ever landed on reefs or stormed jungles. They were lost in the factories. His diary entry that day, later discovered after the war, began with a single word that captured the paradox of his life's work: final. Across the Pacific, the contradiction of the era unfolded in full force. Japan's warriors were raised on ideals of sacrifice, spirit, and the belief that the human heart could overcome all odds. Yet America had unleashed a new kind of warfare, one fought not only by soldiers but by assembly lines, where sparks from welding torches replaced the sparks of sword against steel. It was a conflict defined by myth versus machinery, by ancient codes colliding with modern capacity. In the Emperor's empire, people were told that Japan's spirit was stronger, purer, invincible. But on the other side of the ocean, in places like Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Seattle, the truth was being hammered into existence, literally. Liberty ships sliding off production lines every 4 days. Aircraft factories producing more planes in a month than Japan could in a year. A nation of ordinary workers, many of whom had never seen the ocean, were shaping the destiny of the Pacific. This is the heart of the story. How an industrial democracy overwhelmed an imperial power that believed willpower alone could defy physics, resources, and time. On paper, Japan looked unbeatable at the start. Battle-hardened troops, cutting-edge carriers, elite pilots forged through years of war in China. But beneath the victories at Pearl Harbor, Malaya, and the Philippines lay a dangerous illusion, that the empire's early striking power could compensate for its fragile industrial base. The turning point came slowly, then all at once. By mid-1943, the United States had built more carriers than Japan could hope to construct in 5 years. By 1944, the skies above Saipan, Leyte, and the Philippine Sea were filled not with Japan's once feared Zero fighters but with waves of Hellcats, Avengers, and Helldivers, outnumbering their opponents 10-1. Behind each aircraft stood not just pilots, but machinists, welders, farmers-turned-factory workers, Rosie the Riveters, engineers, and metallurgists who transformed raw materials into relentless force. The admiral writing his final entry was part of an older world, a world that believed wars were won by honor, leadership, and the superiority of one's fighting spirit. Yet he realized, perhaps earlier than most, that the war would be decided not by ancient virtues but by modern realities. American industry makes triumph impossible. The line stands today as both confession and epitaph. This documentary begins not on a battlefield, but in a quiet room with a man confronting a truth larger than any empire. A truth forged in factories, delivered by convoys, and measured in tons rather than tales of heroism. It is the story of a war fought on 2 fronts, one of steel and oil, the other of belief and denial. In the end, this is not simply a chronicle of battles lost or ships sunk. It is a reflection on what happens when a nation wagers its future on courage alone, while another mobilizes the full force of modern civilization. This is the story of how one admiral's final words reveal the deeper reality of World War II, that in an age of machines, the greatest weapon was not the sword, the plane, or the ship, but the system that built them. ACTI, build up, the mirage of early victory. The war began with confidence, a quiet, almost serene belief within Japan's naval elite that fate itself had chosen them. The Emperor's navy had proven itself across Asia since the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, and by 1941, it boasted the most formidable carrier force on Earth. Admirals like Isoroku Yamamoto understood America's strengths, but political leaders clung to an enduring fantasy, that Japan could win a short, decisive war before American industry awakened. Their hope was rooted in a dangerous misconception. That quality could overcome quantity, that a tightly disciplined, expertly trained force could offset material limitations, and that superior spirit, the Yamato Damashii, could bend history. But beneath the polished decks of Japan's carriers lay a fragile reality. Japan had less than 1/10 of America's oil reserves, fewer than 1/5 of its machine tool steel production, barely 7% of U.S. output, no capacity for long-term replacement of pilots, ships, or engines. Even as Zeros swept through Pacific skies in 1941–42, Japan's logistical weaknesses lurked in the shadows. American miscalculations at Pearl Harbor fed Tokyo's illusions. Newspapers proclaimed victory, and military parades celebrated the empire's expansion across Southeast Asia. But Yamamoto, himself a realist, famously warned after the attack, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant." In Tokyo, however, another voice whispered a darker truth. The admiral, whose diary would become a quiet indictment of Japan's war planners, spent the early months analyzing American production numbers. His memos were straightforward and alarming. United States can produce 50,000 aircraft a year. Japan cannot replace pilot losses beyond 1943. American shipyards will double capacity within 18 months. Each report was filed. Few were read. None were acted upon. ACT-2, the turning point, machines that decide wars. By mid-1943, American industry unleashed its full power. Aircraft. Henry Kaiser shipyards produced Liberty ships so quickly that entire vessels took shape in a matter of days. Factories in California, Michigan, and Ohio became symphonies of motion, riveting, forging, assembling. U.S. aircraft production. 1942, 47,800 planes. 1943, 85,900 planes. 1944, 96,300 planes. Japan, at its peak, managed less than 30,000. Each American fighter was not just an aircraft, it was a statistical guarantee. The F-6F Hellcat, introduced in 1943, soon achieved kill ratios as high as 19-1 against Japanese Zeros. Pilots who trained for a year replaced Japanese aviators trained for 5. The mathematics of modern war were merciless. Naval power. In the summer of 1944, just before the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the U.S. Navy deployed 15 fleet carriers, 8 light carriers, 33 escort carriers. Japan could muster barely 6 carriers, many short of planes and fuel. It was no longer a contest of strategy, it was a process of erosion. A storm of steel, fuel, and manpower sweeping toward the Japanese homeland. ACT-3, confrontation. The empire faces the numbers. The admiral's diary reveals the emotional core of Japan's unraveling. During June 1944, as U.S. carrier groups launched their crushing attack in the Philippine Sea, he recorded, "Reports claim hundreds of American planes destroyed. Yet their numbers do not diminish. The swarms grow thicker each hour. We cannot continue at this rate." Other conversations, reconstructed from surviving notes and testimonies, show the rising tension. Chief of Staff. Another 100 planes? Impossible. Their factories must be devouring the earth. Admiral. No. They are organized. We are improvising. Young naval officer. Our pilots fought bravely. Admiral. And they will all die bravely. But bravery cannot produce steel. These were not moments of defeatism, but dawning clarity. ACT-4, human element, voices from both sides. A Japanese pilot's letter home. We fly old engines patched so many times the mechanics call them ghosts. The Americans replace their engines before they break. We fly them until they explode. An American factory worker's memory. I never saw the ocean. But every bomber I helped build, I thought, this one might bring someone home. We weren't fighters. We were builders. Radio chatter over the Philippine Sea. Bandits at 10 o'clock. There must be 50. 50. Hell, there's 100. That's just the first wave, more coming from the east. A Japanese captain's private note. I look at the sky and see the end. Not for lack of courage, our men have that in abundance, but because the sky belongs to the one who fills it. ACTV, consequences, a war measured in tons and tears. By 1945, the numbers painted a stark picture. America produced 300,000 aircraft during the war. Japan produced 76,000, many obsolete by arrival. Naval shipyards delivered 1,700 major vessels. Japan produced less than 200 of comparable class. Casualties mounted. Cities burned. Fuel vanished. Factories collapsed. Japan fought on, but increasingly with shadows, training boys of 16, launching kamikaze missions born of desperation, not doctrine. The Admiral's final entry came in late July 1945. We have asked our heroes to do the impossible. The Americans ask only their factories. Triumph is no longer within reach. Perhaps it never was. ACT 6. Reflection. The meaning of the Admiral's words. The diary is not merely a lament, it is a revelation. It shows how modern war transforms nations into engines, where victory belongs to the side that can sustain effort, adapt technology, and mobilize its entire society. Japan believed spirit could match steel. America proved that, in the industrial age, the greatest weapon is the nation that can build the most, fastest, and longest. The war ended not with a final battle in the traditional sense, but with the quiet acceptance of an undeniable truth, the truth the Admiral had captured in his journal months earlier. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, the broadcast voice of Emperor Hirohito spoke of the enemy's new and most cruel bomb, but he also acknowledged something deeper, that Japan could no longer sustain the war. The empire had run out of pilots, ships, fuel, ammunition, steel, out of time. America, meanwhile, was producing so much material that it had stockpiles left untouched when the war ended. Warehouses were filled with unopened crates of aircraft engines. Shipyards had vessels half completed that would never see combat. Victory had been achieved long before the final shots were fired. This is the moral irony at the heart of the story. Japan, a nation built on samurai tradition and the belief in the power of individual courage, found itself defeated by an opponent that drew its strength from millions of people who never saw the battlefield. Housewives in Oregon welding aircraft frames. Black workers in Alabama forging steel under segregated conditions. Immigrants in New York working assembly lines through the night. Students, retirees, machinists, union men, farm girls, together building a force greater than any single army. The Admiral's final line, "American industry makes triumph impossible," was more than an assessment. It was a prophecy fulfilled. It revealed that the true battlefield of the 20th century was not only land or sea, but the factory floor, the logistical network, the supply chain, the mechanized heart of a society. In the post-war years, Japan rebuilt itself by embracing the very forces that defeated it. The nation that once believed spiritual purity outweighed machinery became a world leader in industrial efficiency, electronics, automotive innovation, and global trade. The factories that had once been mobilized for war now produced peace, radios, cameras, cars, ships, exported not with the arrogance of empire, but with the precision of craftsmanship. And America, too, faced the hidden cost of victory. The industrial colossus that had mobilized to defeat fascism did not demobilize easily. The Cold War demanded constant vigilance, standing armies, and permanent military production. The economic boom that followed came with its own contradictions: prosperity for some, inequality for others, social tensions that would erupt in the 1950s and 60s. The victory was immense, but it was not without scars. Yet the most enduring legacy is this: Japan and the United States, once bitter enemies, became allies, bound not by fear, but by shared economic and political interests. The factories that once fueled war now fueled partnership. The irony is profound. Two nations that fought over the Pacific became co-architects of a new world order. The Admiral's diary survived only because a junior officer tucked it into a chest after the war, believing future generations needed to read it. When historians uncovered it years later, they found not bitterness, not blame, but a sober reflection on power, progress, and human limits. The most haunting line appears near the end. "We asked our men to be steel. We forgot that steel itself must be made." It is a sentence that lingers, echoing across eras. For in the modern age, wars are not won simply by courage or strategy, but by systems, by the ability of a nation to turn ideas into machines, resources into output, will into sustained action. The real battlefield lies in the coordination of millions, in the silent determination of workers, in the unseen labor that makes every victory possible. And so this story, though set in a specific time and place, carries a universal truth, one that extends beyond war, beyond industry, beyond nations. In every age, the fate of societies is shaped not only by the boldness of their leaders or the bravery of their soldiers, but by the strength of the systems they build, the unity of their people, and the resilience of their ideas. That is the final lesson of the Admiral's words. Not defeat, not despair, but clarity. And perhaps that is why his entry resonates still. Because it reminds us that power is never a single force but a constellation of human effort, belief, organization, and endurance. In the end, the greatest triumphs, and the greatest failures, are the ones built slowly, invisibly, by the hands of millions. From the factories of America to the ruins of Tokyo, the story reveals one enduring truth. In the modern world, the mightiest weapon is the collective strength of a people united in purpose.